having worked recently with Year 5 on Macbeth, I think the most useful resources that we've used have been those that have allowed the children to engage with the story and develop an understanding of the plot. But at the same time, they've maintained use of the original language, and they haven't tried to set the story in modern times. So it's really let the children see the historical context and the way that the story unfolded at that time. So we looked at a filmed version of a play that used the original language, but had part of it was sung, and the children really enjoyed that and were desperate to sort of watch bits of it again. And the other thing that would be really helpful, because it was something that we ended up developing ourselves, were types of resources that help the children become the characters within the play and explore how those characters relate to each other and the relationships between the characters, and some resources that would maybe help the children script elements of the story that you don't see would be quite useful, I think, for me in future. And that was working with Year 5 with 9 and 10-year-olds. Recently also, we've worked with Romeo and Juliet, but that was with a group of older children with Year 8, so 13-year-olds. And for them, I think the most difficult thing was breaking down the language within the play, and so resources that help the children explore the language without just translating it into modern English would be really helpful.
Have you ever used Globe Education?
Is Globe Education the one that the theatre website, or is it? Because I've looked at the website from the Globe Theatre, but I've never been to the Globe Theatre, but I know.
Have you used stuff off the website?
Yeah, I've looked at stuff off the website. It's the problem that I had with it was that it was slightly inaccessible in terms of the amount of maybe expertise that you'd need to use in school, and the amount of time that you'd have to set aside to use those activities. But within a different context, then yeah, they would be really helpful. They were nice resources, but they were a little bit too involved for what we were doing in school.
So with Shakespeare in schools, it's one of those things that they don't do enough of, as far as I'm concerned. And working in the primary school that I'm working in, I've been trying to get it from Key Stage 1 and reception right the way through to Year 6. The one big problem that we come across is the fact that teachers are scared to do anything to do with Shakespeare because they don't understand it themselves. As part of that, there are very few resources that are there to help them, and the resources that we do have are very much this is the story, this is the plot, and there is no differentiation. So when teachers who don't necessarily understand Shakespeare are provided with this information, they panic. So as far as teaching goes, it needs to be broken down so that not only children but teachers can understand what they need to do and where they go and how they organise a unit.
We teach Shakespeare at my school as often as we possibly can. It is covered all the way through from 7 to 13. In lower school, we do a couple of the more famous plays, things like Midsummer Night's Dream. We look at Macbeth, and there's opportunities for things like Romeo and Juliet. I think personally the most effective way to teach Shakespeare of any kind is to get the kids doing it practically. The important thing is, I think at the beginning, is to not try and deal with the language, but to deal with the story. So you get the students to the point where they understand the story of the play. Now that can be done for various different methods, by having a very quick kind of plot breakdown, and you get kids to perform different parts of the plot just in terms of the story. Or you do a bit of side coaching, which is where you stand up with your plot sheet and say, right, we have Macbeth running onto the moor. Run onto the moor, on a horse, that's it, on a horse. And they kind of act it out as you kind of coach it from the side. So you get the story there before you even start dealing with any of the subtleties, because the language is always the barrier. These students are always of the opinion that Shakespeare is really hard to understand, and that's perpetuated by virtually everybody else, their parents and various things like that. Whereas, of course, if you break Shakespeare's language down into speeches or parts of speeches or little conversations, especially the prose conversations, which are very much like an ordinary chat between people, then the students start to understand that actually, yes, parts of Shakespeare are a little dense, but most of it is actually a lot more understandable than they would ever think in the first place. When it gets to things like GCSE and A-level, of course we have to get more into how does an actor perform Shakespeare properly and get the rhythm of the different meters that he uses and things like that. At A-level they have to go and see him, and we see as much Shakespeare as we can possibly afford, or the students can afford, because that's by far and away the best example to go and see a good production somewhere other than like the Globe or what the RSC is doing, or some of the more even challenging theatre companies like Frantic Assembly. If you don't connect with it yourself, it's like horses. If you approach a nervous horse and you're nervous, that nervousness translates. You've got to come in with a certain confidence, and that confidence has got to be from learning to love it yourself. I think that's a key thing I've seen over the years. Some teachers who aren't entirely comfortable with Shakespeare trying to teach it don't tend to achieve much success with it.
Have you ever used Globe Education?
I've used some resources and images from the Globe website and things like that, and the RSC have a good resource site as well, especially in terms of ideas, because they also help the School Shakespeare Festival out with their teacher training workshops, director training workshops for the festival.
Just focusing on Globe Education a second, what stuff have you used?
Not actually, really. Images are the big thing, because there is so much there online from all kinds of people, and actually what I tend to go for is if I want to teach a play, I'll rely on another teacher who's had success with a particular scheme to give me theirs, to share theirs with me.